My name is Stephen Brand, and I'm excited to be moderating today's panel discussion, The Wizardry of NaaS, Understanding Network as a Service and What's Driving It. There are lots of as-a-service models. Most of you are familiar with Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS, Platform as a Service, PaaS, and Software as a Service, SaaS or SaaS. But beyond those classic three, others have emerged. And one of those that has emerged, one of those as-a-service models that has received a lot of attention recently has been Network as a Service, or NaaS. Now, if we were to ask a handful of experts to define that term, we would get several different definitions. So we have an esteemed set of experts here to help us wrap our arms around this interesting topic. I do want to say a bit, though, before we get to them. I would ask if we can go to the next slide. I want to point out to you all that the Networks and Telecommunications COI is made up of the folks that you see on the screen here. The volunteers that lead, these are the volunteers that lead the NNT COI and really take to heart the concept of collaboration that produces better solutions and innovative strategies to make to make our nation successful. And this collaboration is obviously between industry and government. So I want to acknowledge those folks and thank them for what they do. But we're here to, we came to this session to hear from our panelists. And so today we have Ted Corbett from Gartner, Jim Kennedy from GSA, and Robert Sears from NOAA. And I'm going to ask those folks if they would introduce themselves. And Ted, I'll ask if you would go first, please.
Yes, thank you. And to everyone, I'm thrilled to be here and be a part and make a contribution. I've been with Gartner about 9 years, and I know I'm looking a little bit older than that picture. So in the industry, close to 40. And I started in communications in the military for our government. So kind of been in that my whole career. And I help in a number of infrastructure, different topics of build command centers and these things. Very active over these past 9 years, especially with most of the agencies, all DoD, and some of the IC. And look forward to our session this morning.
Great. Robert?
Great. Good morning. Thank you for having me. So I'm Robert Sears. I am the director of the NOAA program with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I just started my career 10 years at the Navy and then moved over to NOAA. So I've been with NOAA about 23 years. I'm also the chair of the Federal IPv6 Task Force, a network chair with the Cloud and Infrastructure Community of Practice, and the government chair here on the Network and Telecom ACT-IAC Community of Interest. So I try to keep my hands in just about anything that has to do with networking. And this is a very poignant topic for myself because our program is a network as service provider. So it'll be a great conversation to have with everybody here. And I see a lot of names on the attendance list here that I recognize. So good morning, everybody.
All right, and Jim.
Hi, thanks, Stephen. I'm Jim Kennedy. I'm working for GSA for the last couple of years. I work in the solutions development office for EIS and SATCOM mobility solutions. And I'm looking forward to this call or to this conversation.
Excellent. I'm excited now for us to jump into this. As you all will remember at the opening, I mentioned that there tends to be some ambiguity around just what NaaS is. And I want to make sure that we have a firm foundation for today's discussion. So to get us all on the same page right from the beginning, Ted is going to give us an overview presentation of this topic. Ted.
Thank you, Stephen, and good morning, everyone. We'll spend a few minutes here and get grounded. As Stephen mentioned, a lot of examples, highly cloud shared related as a service, software service, and so forth. So we're all very experienced, right, with the market for all those different platforms. And here we have NaaS, right, introduced. And some years ago, we wrote our first note in 2018, and this has been very interesting. And I'd say a couple of things overall first as we get into this is Gartner has a definition. We focused on what's different. You'll notice that in our definition. The market has many definitions, and they're all perfectly appropriate in certain circumstances. That's what I would advise. I have lots of calls with different others in government, certainly some of you all here, I expect. So as we look at this, we say, well, we want to simplify this, right? We have these refreshes, a lot of government agencies as well. I have to go back for budget and do this every year, or even every 5 years can be quite cumbersome, of course. So is there a way to have this as a consumption model where we just pay some predictable fee and get the results we want for the agency and for our missions? It says here emerging on customer premise. That's really the key difference. So when you think about those cloud type services as a service, they're all multi-tenant, meaning many customers can be served from a common instance or platform, if you will. And we know on premise, there's just one switch and one access point we're near. That isn't in the same context, something that many different customers can come into securely. So when you think about, and as you look at this, that will be one important item to keep in consideration as to how does that work for my LAN in particular, or anything on-premise, data center, that type of thing. The different pricing models, there's a multitude, right? We've seen in the market today a couple that are per seat. There's some that are per square feet, which is interesting. And then, of course, there's a strong desire from the buyer side, right? Us and government and others. Boy, I'd like to just pay how much we use, right? Perhaps that's per port. Perhaps that's a function of megabytes and gigabytes like we see in some of the cloud platforms. Perhaps it's the amount of time per day. These types of things are all variables that the industry is certainly coming up with a model that can work for both sides, if you will, where we get the quality and the predictability, and they're able to sustain their business, which is necessary, of course. Okay. In all cases, the notion of maintaining operations for the life cycle is necessary, and it's required. So when we say managed network services, we are talking about LAN and WAN management, full life cycle, day 0 to day 2 forever is part of this, and necessarily so. And we'll get into why that is the case, that they should run it, or a third party, I'll put it that way. It might be provided by an agency, right? Okay, maybe we move on then. So as we get into this, we distinguish between things that when we buy a circuit, for example, of course, we're the only ones usually on the last mile, right? And then it becomes a service. So it's been a service. It's very adapted to this model of as a service, of course. But the interesting of this bursting of bandwidth and so forth, for many of us, we know the original network on demand was around quite some time ago, but it was very different, right? Than very rapid switching and increasing bandwidth to offer loads that are higher than normal day-to-day use, perhaps, right? And certainly on the WAN edge has evolved, right? The site edge with, of course, SD-WAN and security being either cloud or on-premise or both in many cases. So all these things can come into the same model, same consumption model of network as a service. With wireless LAN and WAN, it's not necessarily limited to access points and switching or on-premise LAN controllers. Certainly, too many to spend a whole day to get to. That's how many endpoints, right? Physical access control, any types of IoT device, these things, of course, environmental systems. These all end up in these designs for certain types of sites where we have those requirements that are far beyond, let's say, an office environment. Okay. Now, so thank you. And so the simplifications, flexible spending options, it's interesting. Let's use a quick example of where this is going and what we hear certainly from government and many others around the world is this flexible spending. Could you go back, please? Thank you. And this flexible spending options, and that's the notion of a real common or one that comes up a lot is, well, if I'm only using 10 ports on a switch, can I just pay for each port and not those other 14 maybe on a 24-port switch, just as an example? And is that more economical for me? Is that, a better deal? And in many cases, the better deal in economics may very well be driven by we can do a 10-year deal, or we could do something that's very predictable in a full life cycle, right? Where we do want to be tied to the amount of consumption of these resources, these networking resources, right? So these options are in demand because they have appeal, right? And on the vendor market industry side, they're most certainly scrambling and doing their things to make this experience as I'll say simple and consumable as they can, and that's exciting, I think, for everyone. And I go on down to less desire to own. It's dominantly so far. It's not about owning. It is about a if you will, a financial lease. It's a rent, meaning just a fixed pay for my equipment, software on that network equipment, the maintenance for the hardware, any repair, any type of that is all included, fixed price, and then the management layer, this managed network operations. And that's a turnkey package of what's all needed to be done, right? And so ownership, we already have that option. We can buy it and refresh everything every 5 years. That's standard model, we know. And what else has been driving this? Well, certainly the excitement of something new. That's why we call it hype, is because it's a hype originally. Everything starts pretty exciting, and then it goes through its path of maturity and improvements and refinements from the industry. And that's why this is a very, I think, very apropos topic for this morning and these days. Lifecycle management, the agility for changes. People come and go. We want to turn things off. We want to maintain security. And then we also want to accommodate those new users coming in where we say, uh-oh, here's some users that have different consumption requirements, and we can adapt to those, have a more flexible infrastructure. Okay, please. But with everything, there's always be careful. Right. And what we look for and what we really would want to see is that comparison of, well, if I do this without the model, how much is that going to cost me? Absolutely see that quite a bit versus this model. And then what comes into that, it isn't just, oh, $1 versus $2. It is the cost back to procurement, these major programs, the life cycle. I did ITAS for a couple of years with the Air Force, if you've heard of that. So these things are very, very critical to cost and weighing options in this space. So see that quite a lot. Now, changing providers, you think about that. Well, what if after 5 years, I don't like Ted's NaaS, we're going to fire Ted? What happens to all the equipment they've been providing us? Well, the current market is they take it with them. Well, that's a big deal. Of course, we would expect and want to consider that if should that case happen, oh, we want you to leave the equipment. We'll buy it. We'll have to do something with procurement, but that would be a more logical approach, correct? Versus they're going to come in and take things out like it's some type of generic capability, right? Here, networking. Now, at the same time, as you think about the scale of these models for the industry, we are used to owning design and architecture very commonly with respect to how we design let's just say a local area network or how we want our WAN designed. More importantly, on the on-prem LAN world, the industry would not want to just have every single vendor available as a component and still be able to survive, I'll say, financially with that type of a model. So that there's an amount of, and I'll say, trust of design and architecture to be approved by us, right, on our side here with the government, but less variables of, well, you can have anything you want. Well, people don't buy anything they want anyway already. So it's something to understand of the relationship with design and architecture shift here, but it's not anything to, right, overly worry about, would be my advice. Okay. Made some comments about NaaS and the flexibility, right? Now here, don't want to own. Well, you know, there's not a lot of value in owning necessarily out in a commercial enterprise world. Sure, they have CapEx budgets and OpEx budgets and these things, and those apply to us as well, but it's different. And having an option to just consume and say, oh, great, when this is worn out, this equipment, I'm just going to get new equipment as part of the deal I did. So now I'm not going through all that procurement and so forth. And that's a function of not owning it, right? That creates that flexibility in the commercial terms when we go to procure under this model, right? Getting it from a single vendor doesn't mean the components are single vendor, which is a very, very nice thing, right? It doesn't mean, oh, I'm buying NaaS from Ted and they're all got his label on it, every piece of equipment, every single thing. No, it's a kit for sure. Oh, my LAN kit. Oh, and I said I preferred these vendors for switches and APs and this vendor for some other OT devices, any of these kinds of things. Sure, it's still a solution, it's still a kit, a standard kit when I'm saying a configuration for any type site, right? But it's not single hardware software vendor necessarily, right? A single provider that wraps it all up, most preferable. Okay. Of course, if we want to own it, that's not exactly the fit here, and that would be along the lines of what I said. May be that tail use case of, we want this to end, we're going to have to buy this equipment, right? Now, control and sourcing flexibility is a good one. So, well, what do you mean I don't get control? Well, you have very familiar already, your SLAs, your commercial agreements, these types of governing documents that we already have, those absolutely apply there. And in sourcing flexibility comes up of, well, the flexibility is that we don't have to spend the time, right, on the acquisition, and the sizing of it on a per person, or a couple of examples I gave, basis or per port allows us to scale up and down. We're not always saying, well, how many ports are we going to need in 5 years? Well, we need not overly study that in this model. We can say, well, we've got plenty of ports, and if we get surprised and need 10 more of whatever it might be, we simply request 10 more and we get them, versus often taking quite some time and some effort to accommodate that growth. And I see this a lot, of course, across our government, of in and out. Naturally, I see it a lot in the military, right? Because they're going in and out. Well, all agencies have that, right? We have retirements, we have things coming in, we have interns or other temporary. My favorite is, well, we have other friends, I'll say, right, in other agencies. They come and visit us and stay at our facilities. Sure, we were working on a program with them. We need to accommodate that group coming. I see this very common. Yeah, they're coming in for 6 months for a particular project, and we need to support them at this location. So they need networking. They need the full suite, if you will, not as guests in that classic sense. Okay. And then the last two here is interesting. You know, I don't know any of us that are really static environments, is flat or growing demand. I think we're all expanding. And look at it this way. even if we weren't expanding, what if we were retracting, right? What if we were pulling back? Well, boy, that'd be a good time to pay less as you reduce or close a location, and these kinds of things brings great flexibility. If we really like to do things all ourselves, and yes, there's plenty of places we need to do things ourselves in all of government, but it's far from everybody, is what I would say, right? That's perhaps a common understanding as well. And this topic, of course, is sweating assets, meaning using them past their useful life. And then we run into end of sale and end of life from vendors, naturally. We don't get those software updates. It's problematic, and I'm smiling. It's everywhere. There's an amount of that, and government. I speak to some. Yes, our switches are 10 years old. Yes, we know we shouldn't do that because there's no protection for those. So that has a value too, because it's like, well, that actually removes that option of sweating, and maybe we shouldn't sweat assets and go uncovered for software. And specifically security updates make it very difficult. Right? I hope this tees up a healthy conversation here this morning, and looking forward to the rest of our session. Thank you.
Certainly, I'm sure it is going to tee up interesting conversation. And thank you very much, Ted, for that excellent presentation. Before we go on, I want to share with all the attendees, if you have questions, not just right now, but throughout, please put your questions in the chat. And if that becomes difficult and you have to raise your hand, we'll try to acknowledge your question there as well. But I also want to take this opportunity to give our other panelists an opportunity to add to what Ted just shared. So to Jim and Robert, are there any points that you would like to make to help kind of set the foundation for what we're going to discuss today? And either of you can come off mute and share if you have something else you want to add.
Sure. I'll jump in. So this topic, it resonates with something that is a kind of a key foundation of, I guess, my principles as a federal employee, IT practitioner, and that is IT, and in this case, networking in general, as a mission enabler and not a cost center. A lot of times, our IT is just, it's the cost of doing business, but can we make it an enabling factor where your mission, it's not just getting by, it's not just the day to day, but it's pushing your mission forward. It's whether that's additional bandwidth that you couldn't afford because you moved to a network as a service, which is through a shared provider, whatever that technical factor may be, that could be an enabling factor for your mission. And we've been seeing that a lot within NOAA, within the Department of Commerce, and even some other folks we work with, is if your job is to forecast space weather, your job is to enforce phishing regulation, really the IT side becomes a secondary factor. So if you have a network as a service provider that's doing it from end to end, from the closet switch to the cloud to your wireless, your LAN, it really takes that burden from that mission and it lets them focus on what they're really there for, the science, the stewardship, the service to the country through their mission, and let a entity that truly strictly only does networking, that does it well, that is continuously watching the markets and doing all that research, the architecture, then it relieves that burden and you get all of those benefits that Jeff was talking about, which is the acquisition. You don't have to do the acquisition anymore. You don't have to do the property management anymore. Your maintenance, your management. But then the bigger thing is the FISMA security. If you can get it where your service provider is providing you the FISMA controls, you don't have to do that in your ANA anymore, your annual assessment. So it wraps this entire value around the service and lets you focus on your mission. And then again, it becomes an enabling factor, not just a cost. And we could talk more about that and get into the details here in a bit, but I'll turn it over.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it's really about, flexibility and scalability. As Ted mentioned, you can easily, add services or add had to reduce, services as your, agency grows or reduces. It's more convenient in a sense that, don't have to worry. It's a peace of mind, and it's, you don't have to worry about having to be responsible for those components and upgrading your network on an as needed basis. You can kind of pass it off to a vendor, and they can definitely help you, with your network requirements.
All right, Jim, I think we're going to stick with you here for a second, but in recent years, the federal government has spent more than $30 billion per year on GWACs. And while this is not exclusively via GSA clearly has some insights into the spending. So Jim, can you share with us some expectations of goodness that will come from adopting network as a service?
Yeah, so I mean, you really need to know your requirements when it comes to network as a service. It can save agencies a lot of money or a lot of time and energy in the long term when you adopt network as a service, the network as a service model, and it allows the agencies to not necessarily forget about their network, but they can, like I said before, they can allow another vendor to be more managing of it, which allows them to expand their mission and focus more on their mission versus having to move resources to manage their network or upgrade the network, or it makes it a lot more convenient, like I said before, in the sense in the whole sense of their mission. Yeah, so.
Okay. So the GSA and NOAA have very different missions. And I want to ask you, Robert, about this from your perspective. NOAA is often a technology leader. So is NaaS a technology that NOAA has pursued?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So definitely, and the program that I am the director for is a network service provider, and the history, and you mentioned NOAA is definitely a technology leader, consumer. When you talk about, we do everything from the bottom of the ocean to the surface of the sun. That's our mission area. Satellites, sensors, you name it, big data, supercomputing. We have 2 operational supercomputers, 3 research and development high performance computing systems, partnerships with universities. So we're embedded in that high performance computing, that networking that really needs to push boundaries.
So
that
I'm trying to listen to a conference that I can't. I'm trying to mute it, and I can't figure out how to mute it.
Hot mic.
All right, I think we got it.
Okay. So 14 years ago, under the American Reinvestment Recovery Act, NOAA received a lot of money, I'll just say millions, to invest in climate research supercomputing. That meant big new supercomputers that were purchased. One was located in Fairmont, West Virginia, one in Princeton, New Jersey, Boulder, Colorado, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And those of us who are in the networking world, if you're on here, what happens usually after you buy the compute and you do all this stuff, you're like, oh, well, I got to network this thing. I got to get access to it. I got to get scientists to get to these locations. So they came to our team. We were operating out of Boulder, Colorado. We were doing a lot of proof of concept with long haul, high speed data networks. This is around 2010. Long story short, we took some one-time money. We built a backbone like any enterprise carrier would. Major cities, Denver, Colorado, Chicago, McLean, Virginia, Atlanta, built this big backbone. At the time, it was only 10 gig. We connected our supercomputers to it, the research compute, and the scientists had access to it. And by 2011, when all the stimulus money ran out, we were like, okay, does this remain a research computer, a high performance research compute network, or can we do other things with it? And we took the risk and said, all right, let's see if we could make this a NOAA-wide resource. Fast forward to today, 14 years later, it is a NOAA-wide resource. It's actually a Department of Commerce-wide resource. It's not just the backbone. We've gone from 10 gig to 400 gig. We do trusted internet connectivity, so all of the data that ingresses and egresses of NOAA. Almost all of the Department of Commerce bureaus are under the TICAPs, but we started to do other services because if we had the networking at your campus, well, our customer said, can you do wireless? Can you do LAN? Can you keep adding these services? And over the past, I'd say 5 years, we've seen a big push to customers saying, you know what, we don't want to do networking at all. Basically, we own my program in our FSMA system. We're a high FSMA system, high value asset. We own the entire network infrastructure, and then the customer just plugs in. So that server, that desktop, whatever it may be on that port belongs to the customer. The entire other infrastructure belongs to Enwave. So we do provide that end-to-end service. We have a service catalog, service level actuals, you know, like your 5 nines, 3 nines, whatever it may be by the service. And it's been growing ever since. And there's lots of intricacies of how you do that in the federal government, because we have to do year-to-year appropriation. We can't save money. We can't invest money like a private sector entity could. So it is really a challenge to continue to grow and create this service within the confines of the federal government. But I think our team has done it very well. And I could talk a little bit later about the risks and how you need to know your. I think Jim said that you got to really know your requirements. You got to know your architecture. You can't do bespoke per customer individual services because you can't manage them that way. You got to have standards. You got to have a standard way you connect to a customer. You got to have a standard way you do your LAN, because if you're going to manage it and save money for an entity, you got to remove that one-on-one, staff that they would normally have in their office to do networking. You got to pull that into your team and matrix it. So instead of somebody paying a full-time FTE, well, they could pay a quarter FTE because that FTE is in our team and they're managing devices in Seattle or they're managing devices in Washington, DC. But because they're standardized and you're leveraging things like automation, you could actually do that very well. But I'll pass on the baton here and we'll continue the discussion.
All right. Any of the other panelists want to weigh in on that before we go to our next question at all? All right. I think that so well, we do have a hand up. So Ashley, where did I see? I think you were the first to have your hand up. Please, you can come off mute and ask a question.
Sure, yeah, not a panelist, just a participant. I put a question in the chat that I think was really in alignment with you were just saying there. So how is the partners, so whether it be a separate line office, whether it be a partner agency like a university, you mentioned they don't have that on-site support staff anymore for just popping over to replace one AP that's out. How's the satisfaction with that? And how is the buy-in going with that?
I guess I could take that since I live in this. So at our major campuses, we do have co-located staff, but at many we don't. So you mentioned wireless. We have wireless all across the country, as far up as the top of Alaska down to Florida and in the Pacific Islands. And in some cases, we have agreements with the local staff. If there's a IT lead or somebody that we call, provide hands and eyes service. So that local office may be the point of contact that we work with and say, hey, there's an AP down, we're going to send you one, can you replace it? If they don't have that type of capability, which and a lot of folks don't, we'll then do a hands and eyes contract with a partner provider. So in some cases, this could be a partner that we have with a university, or in some cases, like up in Alaska, one of our partners, we buy some hands and eyes hours that we could spread across the state, and it just becomes the service level then becomes well, one, you got to set the service level. So for wireless, unless it's a wireless office and that's your only means of connectivity, that SLA is a little bit different from your WAN. So our WANs are 4 to 5 nines, 24/7. Wireless might be a Monday through Friday 8 to 5 type of support. Again, unless that's totally their only LAN connectivity. And then it's response time. Can you work out something with that hands and eyes or that partner to get a response time that's agreeable? Thus far, it's worked fairly well for us. And it is a paradigm shift of seeing that person at their desk all the time, but you're not paying 100% for that person, that engineer, waiting for something to break. You are paying for the service. And then when people leave, so if you have an FTE that's totally there just to support your network and they go on vacation and or they leave, you're worrying about, okay, how do I backfill? What's that risk? When it's a service provider, it's on us. It's on the service provider. You got to deal with, you'll never see it. You don't know that 2 engineers left the team on the firewall team and the LAN team. We're backfilling it. We're matrixed. You never have that direct risk. So it's another value add there is that staffing component.
Great, thank you. So it's sort of some expectation management, just getting people to adjust to a different type of service. Just because you can't see somebody there doesn't mean that you're not getting a better quality of service. Yeah.
100%.
Okay. Listen, so I think we all know that Gartner, one of the things that Gartner's known for is collecting information about technology trends, both inside and outside the government. And so, Ted, I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about how, what initially was driving the interest in NaaS and how that has evolved over the years. And then I'd like to ask Robert and Jim what your thoughts on about whether those drivers are different within the federal government.
Sure, happy to. And, I think that vast experience of as a service, as we teed up this morning, it was natural. That's why can't we do that with all of networking, right? And I think that's what it launched. It had its, the notion launched, and it's, gosh, it's been, about 2017-ish range of it first saying, hey, wait a minute. And it's evolved to a level of, I'll say, maturity, and listening here to Robert on how that story has evolved, right in the bullseye of what I think the expectation was coming from those past years. So simplification, right? It just works, right? Those kinds of responses from customers. And that's really been critical to it. And frankly, finding those the use cases and the features, right, that create that kind of an experience with the service, and getting down into the details and working through those. Oh, what if, right, if somebody needs a hanging AP? Well, those things are all accounted for when you enter into these agreements, right? That is the point, so to speak, of full life cycle, right? And please, if you
Okay.
would. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, Robert and Jim, have you seen a different set of drivers inside the government for adoption of NaaS?
I think a big one is like IT modernization. It's an easy way or a better way to, upgrade your systems, build a network architecture that allows for, new securities, that adapt the zero trust models and bring in more ways of connecting your users, such as LEO services or 5G, that allow the agency or customer to be able to connect easily and upgrade their systems easily. Most common users won't know what's going on in the background, but they just all they really want to know is, are they connected? Do they have access to their data when they need it? And I think the NaaS model allows that to happen pretty seamlessly, and allows for technology growth and especially with lifecycle management and getting the new technologies out there as soon as possible.
Okay, Rob.
Yeah, I agree with what Jim said. I think the driver for IT modernization, or to simplify it, the customer has a challenge, and the time to research, develop, architect, deploy, it may not be within their wheelhouse. And having somebody that could meet your challenges, and it's something you got to be careful of, because then everything comes your way. I'll say that's something that happens with us. Once you're in that realm and you're providing that service and you're providing everything, again, from the LAN to the cloud to the internet, to wide area, then you become a solutions office as well. So Jim talked about the use of LEO. So one of the big things that's been through the modernization for us has been hard to reach places. So we work a lot in Alaska, the Pacific, our ships, vessels, aircraft. How do they get higher connectivity? How do you get critical data that's getting collected off sensors and drones and other things into the science, into the weather models, and to where you need to take it. So that drive of having an entity that can provide those solutions for you, that can build them, that can work with you and say, okay, what's your requirements, and make a service. So one for us has recently been the ships and aircraft are hard to reach sites where we're using LEO satellite with an SD-WAN overlay to ensure that the connectivity is there, but also the security. So that's just one area. And I think that's that driver you'll see from the federal government is, what are these solutions that meet the growing change of the mission? And it depends on the agency. Some are in offices, some are out in the field doing science. So everything in between, and being able to adapt and know the technology and then have somebody else do that for you versus taking the time within your program to try to spin that up.
Okay. So Jim, I've got another one for you. So we've talked a little bit here about what NaaS is and what its benefits could be. But for those on the call who think they're ready to maybe move forward with a NaaS solution, would you share with us some thoughts on the best acquisition strategies for contracting for NaaS?
Mhm. Yeah, so the best first requirement is to understand what your needs are and what your requirements are. Developing a network architecture diagram, understanding your user base and what you're going to need on your network and where you're going to be located. Using our contract EIS contract vehicle, we don't see like a network as a solutions product, but you can build your own. We're with managed network services and managed security services. We have SD-WAN services on that contract, and then you can also pair it with LEO and 5G services as you either grow or depending on what your needs are. But definitely the understanding where you are currently at and then where you want to go or how you want to what network you want to see in the future is definitely first steps, and then going from there is more streamlined when you know what your requirements are and what you want to see in the future.
Okay. So as we said earlier, there's an opportunity for any of you attendees to ask questions if you have them. You can type it in the chat, raise your hand if you have a question. We're actually a little ahead of schedule, so we can probably take a few more questions than we may have thought we might be able to initially. All right, for the panelists, Ted, you may not have something you want to share, but I was curious if Robert had any insights about acquisition and how, or any pointers for folks who are looking at trying to procure NaaS capability.
Sure. So I go ahead and mention the history of NWAVE and where we started as this HPC network that started to also field general purpose, and then became the enterprise service provider for NOAA, onto the Department of Commerce, and also now working with other federal agencies. Our IT investment authority that we get we do 10 years. I'm actually going through this right now to say, okay, over the next 12 years, NWAVE wants to operate, we want to provide these services, and we want to be able to also, where it fits, offer other agencies the service. And we do this through interagency agreement. So NWAVE has the contract vehicles, the partnerships, and we work with a lot of varying degrees of folks. We work with groups called regional optical networks. These are folks that own and manage infrastructure in the region. So this is fiber optics in the ground. A lot of this is there's universities, there's nonprofits, there's science agencies. Then you have your also your regular providers, your Lumens, your AT&Ts. So basically you have access to looking at everything that could be possible to make the service. And then through a shared service infrastructure, which is what we provide, folks can come and use that. So we do interagency agreements. And it's actually interesting. I was looking at an interagency agreement the other day, and because it's that time of year, you're refreshing all your service level agreements. And there is a section in the form, and it's a treasury form. It's called the 7600B. It says item code, and there's a code, and it says DG10. That's the code that's put in our interagency agreement. And I've never seen it before. And it's a it's a GSA product and service manual code. And DG10 is actually IT and telecom network as a service. And I went and I was like, oh, let me go look this up. And I went into the code, and it says network services delivered as a service by subscription or service contract, physical and wireless networks managed as a service connected to and from core data centers, work areas, and offices, connecting end users and organizations. Anyway, I was like, oh my gosh, that's really cool. That's like very pertinent, not only to this topic, but it's a real thing. And it just comes down to how you can provide it. Again, we started in transport, moving people between data centers, private connectivity between offices, consolidating those dozens and dozens of circuits that are all going into the same building, because it's each program, each line office has their own building, using fiber optics, lighting it. So you have maybe 2 or 3 fibers that go into a building, you light it, and you can go from 10 gig to multi 100 gig, and you could virtualize it so everybody could still have that private communication, but you're doing it over 2 fibers or 3 fibers if you really need super high resiliency, instead of that per circuit, per project, per, that's what we've seen over the last 10 years as we consolidated and cleaned up, hundreds of circuits down to, or even thousands of circuits down to dozens and dozens that go into very specific facilities. So again, our program can work with other agencies, because basically we have, what drives that is we have NOAA has Department of Homeland Security approved multi-agency TICAPs. So in order for NOAA to get 5 TICAPs, we had to be able to provide other agencies the service. So DC, Denver, Seattle, Hawaii, and now Alaska coming up. That's your ingress, egress points to the internet. And then we have capacity, because we need high performance computing capacity. We buy them in chunks of 100, 400, 800. And we have then that ability to basically share excess capacity that we may have with other agencies.
Okay. All right. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. Looks like Ashley asks, with the shared services model, is there any thought in collaborating with DOJ's SOC, shared cyber services, to make it easy for agencies to cover network and security end to end with these services? So I'm not aware of that. Some others on the call may have, others on the panel may have some familiarity, and if you do, would you share that? But that's not something that I'm familiar with. All right, Ted, you're on mute, but I think you're saying it's not something you're familiar with. Okay.
Yeah,
so Ashley, please go ahead.
I was gonna say, the only thing I could think of, because we get this a little bit, is the combination of network as a service and security as a service. So you have that one-stop shop of not only my network, but all of the cyber incident handling. I know for NOAA, because of our TICAPs, that comes with it. So the SOC, the cybersecurity, the incident response, if you have a network service provider, they're doing all of your LAN, all of your WAN, all your internet. They're seeing that telemetry coming from that desktop all the way through, or the cloud. And if you have that common cyber element as well, then you have that other value add, which is that you got the incident response, you got the monitoring, all those components. And if they're cohesive, then it's a holistic service. It's not like I just do the network, and if there's a hack going on, I don't care. I don't, it just passes through. Now you pull it all together and you think, oh, I'm seeing something downstream, and I'm going to alert the SOC. And I know we work hand in hand with our NOAA SOC, and I think they work upstream into like DHS and other areas in CISA. But when you're the network provider, you see everything, right? You have the telemetry, you have the net flow, you have the IP attribution. That's a huge thing. The cyber folks always want, where's this IP coming from? Because a lot of times they don't translate to a DNS record. So you have the network team looking that up. Oh yeah, that's a VPN user in Seattle, because we know that's where that IP address assignment is. And then you work that in with your cybersecurity folks. Attribution, or the response time is better. So I think I guess the key takeaway is, where you can, a cohesive network and cybersecurity bonding makes that service even that much better.
All right.
And if I may, I'll just add a quick comment to that,
Sure.
because that's spot on. U.S. government, I'm not familiar. It's public. The entirety of the 44, I think, functions, divisions of the Canadian government built a big shared service model, collapsed everything, right? They've done that over the last several years as one example. But moreover, on this topic of security, increasingly, right, coming together, I'm talking about function, feature, protection. We have assurance, and then we have protect, defend. And they're seeing the same things with different missions, but absolutely coming together and speak to a lot of government and enterprises with my counterparts that are deep in security, and if you say, okay, because we're talking about these command center operations that are necessarily needing to be increasingly be both sides, right? Security and network. So I think there's definitely a trend there that's continuing to call for both.
I will add as well, with the EIS contract vehicle, we do have the option of using managed network or managed security services to provide that end-to-end security on for all IoT and network-related devices as well. So you have that layer of security with this, as when purchasing services, network services. So it is there. It's just just providing or adding that to your contract or the contract language. So.
All right, so I want to mention two things that I see in the chat. So first, Ashley, your question about DOJ's SOC. I think Tim provided an answer, may give you some more insight there. So take a look at that if you haven't. And Jim, I think you may have touched on an answer to Kevin's question. Kevin is asking about for an agency that's interested in exploring more about the benefits of NaaS, where would we recommend that they go, and who can they contact? I want to say two things. One, Kevin, I would encourage you to join our Networks and Telecommunications COI. We have discussions about this and other interesting topics that I think you may find interesting. But also, Jim just mentioned EIS as a possible next step for you. And Jim, I don't know if you want to say more about that, but I agree with that. That may be a good next step for Kevin or others on the call who want to try to explore this technology.
Definitely, contacting our EIS solutions brokers and tools development teams. We can definitely point you in the right direction, and then help you or develop requirements and make sure that we're able to provide those services that you need as well.
All right, we do have another minute or two if anyone else has a question that you want to share in the chat, or raise your hand. All right, while those folks are doing that, then I will ask our panelists, right? We're going to go around the table again. Ted, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to ask for each of our panelists, what would be the one key takeaway that you would like to leave with our attendees today?
The one I would say that's an accentuation of an earlier statement about standardization and scalability. For this to be the big picture, very successful, we do want to tightly embrace standardization so that we know we're going to be able to scale more effectively. Why is it so important for us? Because our industry partners need to be able to scale as well. So back to it, I just used a comment, it's not bespoke. We want standardized kits because we understand the repeatability and better protection, better for enablement of our missions and the agencies. So I would say that is key.
All right, Jim, what key takeaway would you want to leave the attendees with?
Yeah, I mean, my key takeaway would be to understand the requirements. Develop a clear understanding of what your network requirements are and what you think what you want to do in the future, and just so you know what the scalability can be, you know, where you can go from here, and allow yourself to not be pigeonholed into one situation, and then, you know, make sure you understand where you're going to go from here. So.
Okay. Robert, any final nuggets from you?
I guess I'll say from a provider perspective, those who are in the game, understanding your customer's mission. So this goes back to comments previously about, you know, your requirements. But if you really understand their mission, what are they trying to do? What's the science they're doing? What's the operations? What's the day-to-day? You can actually help mold some of those requirements, because you will get things like, I need 10 gig, I need, you know, wireless, I need, or 100 gig, and people are throwing things out there because they're thinking about future proofing. And well, if I have a, you know, a 1 gig LAN today, or a fabric in the data center, I want it 10 times that. So I'm future proofing myself. But then you got to really, then you work with them and say, well, really, what's your mission? Where's the data flow? Who are you serving? And you could come to an offering that is more cost effective, because that's going to be a big thing. If you truly have a shared infrastructure, shared service, the cost can be dramatically different. If you're purchasing and buying piece by piece by piece, you're not going to make much savings. So understanding that mission to then come up with a service that meets that mission, that has growth that's baked in there, but that is not trying to just throw something at the wall and be like, I just want everything and anything that comes my way. It's like, well, let's talk about your history. Let's talk about, again, your mission, who you serving, and then that can be tailored and fit into those standardized models.
All right. So as we're wrapping up, I will just say one more thing. I want to put in a plug for the networks and telecommunications community of interest, other projects that we're working on beyond this topic here, one of which is TDM retirement. And that's happening all over the country, all over the world, in fact. And so we have a project that is looking into what the challenges are of dealing with that TDM retirement, and exploring alternate solutions for those organizations that have that technology. That is in addition to non-terrestrial networks. And Robert is one of the key players in that for us. And so, Robert, you want to say a thing or two about that project?
Yeah, really, we're examining some use cases within NOAA, within Department of Energy, actually with some of our tribal partners that we work with in Alaska, to look at, can an agency or an entity solely exist on non-terrestrials, so private 5G, LEO, microwave, and we've presented some some case studies, and that's going to be published here really soon through ACT-IAC. So definitely take a look at that. I put my website up there too as well, because we do have some of our projects there that are part of that. So yeah, it's just those are these other mediums, right? That last mile, that's always going to be that kicker when you're looking at services where your agencies are. They might not be in the most local area. So that new technology, ways to get connectivity outside of just a standardized or standard circuit. So thank you.
All right. So Robert, Jim, Ted, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with this group. We really appreciate it. And to all our panelists, we are happy to have you. I'm sure you found this edifying, and we look forward to having you at another one of the NNT COI monthly meetings. So thank you very much, everybody. Hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.